Master Sergeant Han. Operational log update. While en route to begin anti-piracy operations within the Wild Realms, Navi has detected some unusual readings. Therefore, we have stopped to investigate, finding some debris and mostly empty space. The unusual readings appear to have come from a damaged exclusion drive, which we found spinning and sputtering alone in empty space. I have dispatched the little ones to take their prospectors to analyze the debris and recover any wreckage. We should be back on our way shortly, as this is just an empty patch of space, no less than 2 light years from the nearest system. Lacking a trail of wreckage or apparent energy trails to follow, it seems likely whatever happened took place here, in its totality. We'll be scanning the area and seeing if the wreckage can be identified. Then we'll cog the data and debris back to whoever it belonged to. There tends to be a modest finder's fee, even if no owner can be found. And free funds are the best funds after all. End update. As I finished the log entry, Lieutenant Spawns walked into my office. "Sarge, the scans." He handed me the info tome and I looked over the data. Found that the exclusion drive was a very poor and low-grade model. Perhaps some pre-Age of Stars transport, maybe an in-system hopper. Fairly risky to try an interstellar trip with something like that, especially this far from any of the Silver Realms, but stranger things have been done. There was a distinct lack of identifying markings, both on the exterior on the drive and, more strangely, the internal components. Any thoughts, LT? While he was a master of keeping his facial expression in check, I could tell he had something to add. Well, there are some strange energy patterns, both on the exterior and what would have been the mounting points, both seeming to be from different sources. I looked at the relevant data and saw he was of course correct. Can't find any matches for the patterns on the exterior of the drive, but the ones near the mount seem to be the result of sabotage. I raised an eyebrow, curious. It looks like someone wired the main power into either the framing or the hull, perhaps both. Maybe in some attempt at a cheap and dirty isolation or jamming system at best. At worst, this is deliberate sabotage. But the stress and the energy patterns are clear, unlike the other. Looking again, I was pleased to see that time had done nothing to dull the LT's edge. Agreed, Lieutenant. The other pattern could just be hull wash from whatever impacted the vessel. There's too little data to tell. Any luck on an identification? Negative, sir. I grunted. I still wasn't used to him sirring me. And the wise-ass smile of his never helped much either. Then link up with Nav. I handed him back the tome. Have him perform a 1 light-year area scan and attach it to that. Then cog it and the wreckage to the hunters. Next, I want to be back en route and on schedule as soon as possible. We had bigger affairs to attend to, and there wasn't anything else we could do here. Sir, yes, sir. You got it, Sarge. Space is cold, very cold, but thanks to the magics and other effects woven into my attire, it wasn't even noticeable as I was leading my small team deeper into this structure we were investigating. We had discovered it while tracking a group of pirates, as this was strangely the one place they seemed to avoid, despite it seeming to be a perfect potential base of operations. This place is old, Sarge. Mazzy, floating along, surrounded with a soft golden nimbus of energy that was providing her both air and warmth within this vacuum. The entire outer structure appears to be open to space. The damage to the outer hull indicates it's due to impacts over a long time frame. A score of centuries at the very least. Nada's voice was slightly shifted by the speaker in his walker. Little over 6 foot in height, and controlled via an interface that was mounted on his armless shoulder. It kept him warm, safe, and equipped with an array of sensors and other equipment that we would not have been able to carry normally. Still can't get a precise match on the design. I still say it's a Starfort model, but there are too many inconsistencies. As the lamps from Nada's walker made wide sweeps of the halls and rooms we passed through or traveled in, it became clear quite quickly we were not the first explorers, as frozen bits of blood or other indications of previous attempts could be seen. But strangely, no gear, and no piece of a body larger than a finger, or maybe a part of a hand. Captain, this is Sarge. How do you read? Pretty clear, Sarge. Nautilus link is solid. We're seeing what you are seeing. Excellent. Now what is the first problem we have seen thus far? I could hear the annoyance in the captain's breath. She was not a fan of me leading her to a conclusion. The fact you haven't found any equipment or evidence of who or what these bodies were or how they got... Damn it! I now heard the wry annoyance as she ordered the little ones, who were already orbiting in their prospectors, to begin deep scans looking for any traces of the ships that had to have carried some of these people here. On it, Sarge! Nightrock out! Nada was chuckling. You don't cut any of them a bit of slack, do you? I laughed. Not while on the clock. Just like they better not cut me any either. I looked at Mazzy, who had reached the end of the large room we were traversing. The door she was in front of was a massive bulkhead, leading into one of the major power centers of the structure, by the looks of it. Sarge, if you could handle the controls, Nada and I shall pin the bulkhead open. Mazzy was still floating a few inches off the deck. Her training as a student of the Fist, combined with the vast amount of augmentations she had as a Christon, allowed her a variety of flight options, all granting her a smooth and efficient speed that she used in quite the flourishing manners. Of course, I began working on the console, and I noted just as Nada could not match the structure that we were in exactly, the control systems for this place seemed off. I could not put my finger on it exactly, but every system I had bypassed thus far felt wrong. Too much or too little delay on one, recycle rates off on another. But none had the same difference. This one was acting as it had never been used before, cycling through status and verifications on boot sequences. A couple moments later, however, bulkhead began to slide open as normal and the display looked like you would expect. Strange. The others, Nada and Mazzy, placed metastatic lock pins at the corners of the opening. Little wonders of magic technology. Once activated, it would take a near insurmountable amount of force to move any one of them, as they were linked not only to each other, but through magical means, the surrounding reality itself. We had pinned all the bulkheads we had encountered so far, which had allowed the signal from the Nightrock to reach this deep with so little interference. That was until the energies from within this bulkhead made their presence known, mere moments after the pins were set. The lieutenant spoke up at that point, Start. This is LT. Burst comms only. All readings distorted, even from nada. Over. LT, Sarge. Confirmed burst comm only. Will record and transmit every 30 seconds. Confirmed LT. Over. Sarge. LT. Confirmed 30-minute transmit cycle. Be safe. Out. Looking at Nada and Mazzy, I nodded, and we made our way in. Stepping across the threshold and into the weakly held, but fully breathable atmosphere that the fields were still holding in place in this area, sounds became real again. The sputtering of conduits and consoles could now be heard, along with high-pitched sounds of glass or crystals resounding randomly and often. Even with the atmosphere, it was cold and I shivered. Readings are confused. Layout seems to indicate a Type 4 power control plant center. Nada seemed to get lost in the streams of data from his sensors as he was trying to figure out what we were looking at. Masnoa, for her part, floated with her smooth precision over to one of the main control consoles and softly landed before starting to work on it. Wait, landed? Cold? Shit! I snapped my eyes to Mazzy, who was already looking at me, as if knowing I was about to give an important order. Flash code! Track fans! No! I almost screamed, but managed to keep an even but forced tone. It had been years since I'd given that order. Centuries, in fact. But the golden blur of light that took Nada's walker at the waist, lifted, and carried it out of the compartment proved that our training was more than well enough ingrained, even now. Turning to escape myself and launching myself into a full run, but not using any of my abilities to speed myself up. My efforts to be a distraction and bait bore fruit as a burst of dark fire came from an upper deck. Dodging easily and spinning to avoid the next burst, this time an icy shard of lava. I confirmed what I had feared. Antonai. Seeing the bulkhead shift and seal around the pins, star metal flowing and shaping in a way that should not be possible, I knew I was trapped. And as I heard another 4 set of feet on the deck plating resound from various parts of the power room, I knew what we had stumbled upon. A nest. Hearing an even heavier set of feet from far deeper in the chamber, echoing, my heart sank. Gigai? I could handle. I could even kill a few of them. But a Titani? Or a Colossi? That made things far less clear. The bigger ones were orders of magnitude stranger and stronger. However, I made use of my speed and my reflexes to begin crossing the chamber in an erratic pattern, jumping, diving, and flying from station to station, visiting each several times in the minutes of dodging the frenzies of attacks from the Gigai, who did their best to remain hidden behind pillars, cross beams, and other obstructions. To their confusion, I refrained from using anything but my beater in its whip form, and I was only using that to maximize my mobility. By the time I had finished my efforts, and I could hear the consoles blink and beep, I was sure there were only 6 Gigai, and only one larger of their kind. The larger one I had not been able to see. He had remained hidden. Not an easy task, which made me all the more nervous. Landing on the center deck, I could hear sounds grow even thicker and easier to discern as the atmosphere increased with more pressure. I could hear the breathing of all 7 of them as I landed, including the big one. Behind me, 50 feet, and I was nearing the edge of his reach. The others were driving me towards them. Not bad for invading locusts. Smiling at the sounds of their feral hunger, like starving dogs slowly closing the circle around a bleeding but dangerous beast. For the first time, I pulled my sidearm and launched myself up, flying at top speed to the apex of the main chamber. Arcs and bolts, gouts and waves of energy chasing me as I fired at an emergency latch, and, hitting it with my first shot, it sprang to life. Slides and blocks of metal dropped, and emergency vents opened, initiating a depressurization of the chamber, and taking me along with it for a direct ejection outside the facility. All the atmosphere carried me along the minutes-long journey, bouncing and banging me around at each turn, before spitting me out at a significant speed and with quite the spin. The vortex of deadly energies that was also pulled into the vent behind me began to close the distance with frightening speed, and as I took a tightly balled and defensive position as I could manage in those moments, my robe's lengths of fabric automatically forming a shield around me, I felt a sudden tingle of translocation, and found myself on the Night Rock. Nada was at the controls for the translocator, and he was furious. "What kind of fool are you, Han? There was over a half dozen and you tried to fight them yourself?" "Didn't try to fight him, Nada." His stunned expression gave me the room I needed. "Bridge, this is Sarge. Fill that vent with anti-rounds. Full burst." "Captain, didn't miss a beat." "RA firing, Sarge. Pattern 9, burst fire. Away." I could feel the slight vibration as the launchers finished firing the rounds. "Nav is pulling us back to a safe distance." "Good. Get the prospectors back, locked down. We will send them out to confirm the kills, but there were more than Gigai in there." Nada's face finally composed itself. "If what you say is true, you better hope those rounds don't malfunction." He had to nearly run to keep up with my stride as I headed to the bridge. "Nada, if they don't malfunction, they're not working." I said it with a wicked smile, and his look at first was surprised, then became bemused. "Let me guess, some bit of AD special kit? Something just in case you ran into them during your operations?" As we entered the bridge and could see the station on the main viewer, and the way it was beginning to warp and bend under the forces of the unleashed anti-rounds. "Yeah, the sun came up with them. They destabilize local reality in a way that is only compounded by the presence of any other distorting effects, such as the antennae. However, the more distortion, the worse it becomes, and the more rapidly everything involved in that part of reality begins being converted into one thing." Nada looked up at me seriously. "And what is that?" As the ship shuddered even at this distance from the waves of backwash from the process that was ongoing, I answered. "Gravity." As if on cue, the entire station, and everything for a mile or 5 around it, collapsed into a tiny black hole that would blink itself out in about 20 minutes to an hour. Nada just stood, jaw agape. You just carry these around?" He honestly seemed in shock. "Of course not. We got the blueprint." I just smiled. Mazzy must have put it together on the way out and prepped the rounds as I did my part inside, raising the pressure in the Atmos systems and flooding the chamber with low amounts of randomized energy for them to naturally pervert, adding tinder to the fire that the round she was preparing would set off. As the prospectors launched to ensure that none of them had escaped by some act of insanity, I looked over at Mazzy. "Well done." Her simple nod was the only reply. Nada was shaking his head somewhere between exasperated and amused. I looked at the LT and tossed him a data crystal from my belt. Log it and file it with our AD contacts. 6 Gig-Eye, 1 larger. And the nest. Do not let them lowball the reward just because we're not in the AD anymore. They're still getting credit. There were open bounties on all corners of the realms for the slaying of an Antani or multiple. However, doing it this way, the kills would be counted as those executed by Criterion. Honor to the family. But, of course, there was no sense to not get paid for the work either, as this would have nothing to do with the pirates we were hunting. Now that's clear why they didn't use this station. The loss of the station as salvage is disappointing, but the bounties, plus the knowledge that we had made the realms a better place today, was an acceptable substitute. Nada and Mazzy sat across my desk from me. The captain and the LT had just left after handing in their report that there was no sign of any remains of either the station or of the Antani. After confirming we were back en route to our next lead on the pirates we were originally tracking, they excused themselves. Mazzy had been quiet since my return, and Nada was looking back and forth between us. "Lady, if you don't say your piece." He left the statement unfinished as Mazzy gave him a look I've seen break veterans. But so called out, she began. "Sarge, putting aside the sheer insanity of what you did there." She gestured to the looping replay of data from my suit along with what they had managed to get from the station's various systems. And as I'd open as much of it to the ship as I could while I had the chance. "There is a Class 4, 15-foot Unioni alloyed question that you have done your damn best to avoid at every turn. You could have been slaughtered in there, Sarge, so I am done waiting. I am done being patient. You will answer me now. If that thing is what I think it is, why, in the name of the family, are you not using it?" Nada seemed to flinch and shrink into his chair, and then a voice echoed from the far side of my office, from the still open doorframe. "Because, Miss Noah of the Dreamer's Fist, the good sergeant hasn't finished equipping it. Have you, Han?" I looked to the voice and realized why it was familiar. Seeing the lithe elven woman in standard Criterion combat fatigues, lacking any insignia except for the embossed shape of a skull on her shoulders. "Major General Cristania, it's been a long time. Now what business does the brute second in command have with some washed up retirees?" I was trying to keep a light tone. "Got your bounty report. Though I thought you might want to know. Someone made sure it wasn't going to make it any higher than me." She smiled. "Besides, the bounty needed to be paid in person due to its amount." With that, she tossed a large shoulder bag on the desk. It landed with a solid thud. "Very good work. You do us proud, Sarge. But now that that's done, time for you to get back to doing real work." With that, she turned with a flourish, and from her offhand an envelope flew across the office and arced its way perfectly under my hand. "By the family, good fortune." And with that, the three of us were alone again. Looking at my hand and the envelope now under it, Mazzy looked at me and spoke only 3 letters. questioning in the softest of supplication and fear. H-O-D? As I opened and read the contents of the envelope, I too began to feel similarly. The envelope had contained 2 missives. The first detailed the exact location of the pirates we were currently hunting, and normally I would treat such intel as suspect at the very least. The brutes were the most accomplished and skilled special operations unit in the realms. I know the elves would claim that title for their own special forces, but where they had dozens at the least, and possibly hundreds of agents, the brutes have never numbered more than 13 in all the ages of their service. I knew I could rely on the information as solid and actionable. The second was an introduction and contact information for an NLR technical specialist, as well as the relevant information as to the resources that were allocated to him for the purposes of finishing the secondary systems, as well as the main cannon for my suit. This at last forced me to try and explain to the unit that the suit currently in the suit bay was in fact at least the reforged remains of the suit we'd collectively spent centuries designing and building. The only original components from that suit were the power plant and the mech mind. Everything else, from the frame and outer shell to the internal motive and control systems, had either been rebuilt or replaced. Someone had taken the suit we had worked on for ages and upgraded or improved on the materials and techniques therein to a degree that was awe-inspiring, if not a bit worrying. However, as the original suit had not had any of the advanced systems installed on it when it was lost, they were also apparently lacking in its current iteration. The specialist that was now hard at work in the suit bay would complete the work, with each member of the unit assisting him in constructing and installing the systems that each of them had designed for the suit. It had been nearly 2 weeks already, and the reports were favorable as to the completion within the next few hours, and I, for one, was anxious for it to be done. I had not been to the bay, nor had I met with the specialist at any point since his arrival, and I was not interested in doing so until his work was done. As each of the systems that were added were designs of the unit, I had no fear that they would be anything less than exceptional works of skill and artistry. As I finished going over the known information as to the pirates' base system, slightly annoyed as to the lack of solid information, as the system in question had not been detailed by the Pathbreaker Corps, Navi chimed in to inform me the work had been done and my presence was requested. Confirmed, Navi. Have Nada clear the bay of anyone who is not him or our guest. I didn't want to extend the NLR's unavoidable explanation and demonstration, with members of the unit piping up every 5 seconds with a question or snarky rejoinder. And I will be there directly. Time to see what they managed to cook up this time. As I approached the suit bay, I saw Mazzy speaking with Nada. She turned to look at me, being the only member of the unit that hadn't gone back to their own activities, it seemed. Sarge, I get not wanting to have the little ones here, but are you sure you don't... She stopped mid-sentence as she saw there was no possibility I was letting her stay. Of course, Sarge. Mess hall in an hour, then? I smiled. If it only takes an hour, I'll be shocked. I'll have Navi notify you when it's over. I'll need a good drink and a good meal after this. I widened my smile as I entered the bay, Mazzy nodding and setting off as Nada fell in behind me. The Analar in question was calmly standing, waiting for me patiently. He was at his full height, 14 feet and change, and it was more than obvious when I came into view that he did indeed recognize me. I quickly held up a hand before he could open his mouth. "Greetings, Lord Reginald the 13th. Yes, it has been some time. A different life, in fact, you could say. As I never had the time in chances past, allow me to formally introduce myself. I am Han of Criterion." Reginald's face took just a moment to catch up with my words, and a smile crept along his features. He was of the blessed, those of the elder races born before the wars of feather and scale, and thus seemed to have a quality and power that was lacking in those born in the times after the elders decided to fight each other instead of guiding the realms. "Of course, Mr. Han. My pleasure to finally have a name to place on the design and construction of this work of art." With that, he began to describe the systems that were now installed, from the advanced sensor and tracking system the captain had designed, to the selections of castronomes that the LT had fashioned, going over the Utsi and Exclusi drones that the little ones designed to provide various functionality in great detail. The weapon system Cassian had designed was on the left arm, covered and protected by a shield that contained not only field generators, but matter creators to create an array of defensive options. He spent some time on the details of the main shoulder cannon, from its extra-dimensional storage to the variety of firing modes and round configurations available. Reginald concluded with a full description of the alternate form that had been a product of most of the unit working together to design and figure out the details of. A sleek starfighter configuration. As he wrapped up, Nada approached with a long cylindrical container that he explained held his contribution to the suit's completion. Opening the container, I was struck silent. The long, 5-foot handle was obviously scaled for the suit's size, and was wide and heavy-looking. The blade, which curled along the length of the container, was a whip-like thing of uncountable edges and points. I knew this weapon, or more precisely, the weapon it was based on, and there was only one of those in existence, and it was with its creator. How? I looked at Nada, trying my best not to sound incredulous. Called in a favor or two. He merely held my gaze with a surety that told me better than any words could. That was all the answer I was going to be getting for right now. 25-foot solid length, up to 10 times that fully extended. Star metal alloy and advanced control system should allow you to channel any energy wish along its length in either direction of flow. Its name is Starvine, Reaper of the Wicked. I merely nodded in a quiet shock as Reginald took the tube and the included hardware for the storage and mounting of the weapon in the extra-dimensional systems, and went to work to install it on the right arm. The weapon was impressive, no doubt of that, but the fact that Nada was able to attain it in the first place put him in a brand new light. I was again reminded of the trickster's visit and the warning he had left. Moments later, Reginald was finished, and we had gone over the last details and queries I had as to the maintenance and upkeep of the suit, and Nada was now escorting him to the translocator chamber so he could return home and to whatever projects he had left on hold there. I turned, sealing the bay, and made my way to the mess hall. I could now feel the echoes of the new systems linking into the suit through my harness, and felt the weight of the mini drones that the little ones had fashioned for me, quietly stowed in their own unit on the back of the harness, out of the way, but within use. As I sat down from Mazzy in the mess hall, I smiled as I spoke. 2 hours and 45 minutes. Can't blame the man for not being thorough. She smiled as I continued. By the way, love the shield away. Very clever how you integrated Cassian's work into it. She smiled wider as we began to discuss the uses that the suit, finally ready, would have.
Getting to the system wasn't the issue. Getting in was. We'd spent nearly a week carefully and stealthily reconnoitering the pirate's little hidey hole, all to come to the conclusion there was only one way in or out. The system was surrounded by a cloud of unstable and destructive energies, kept in place both by the system's gravity and at bay by the force of the star's solar winds, which only served to feed the cloud's energetic and impenetrable nature. The only way in or out was a complex that sat outside the cloud, a massive gate, and along its rings were 4 stations armed to the teeth and automated to annihilate any transgressors with extreme efficiency and speed. We had arranged for a meteor or two to make close passes of the gate to see the ferocity of the defenses were capable of. And, while admiring the quality of the challenge in place, we had been left with no clean way to bypass it. That had been until we managed to catch a vessel leaving, a small frigate, bound to who knows where, but armed and mostly empty. Out to pillage and loot most likely. A quick and inspired bit of work from the little ones, and rapidly confirmed by Navi, calculated the course of the vessel and allowed us to preempt their attack on a trade vessel by sending warnings to them. As we waited on the outside of the system that their target was in, we saw the small vessel racing in our direction, now fleeing the fully prepared and ready defenses that they had not expected to run into. As they closed to the edge of the system, unaware of our presence, I was floating silently in my suit, and as the fleeing pirate vessel made the expected course correction to exit the system on a course to safety, I fired my suit's main cannon. The round's configuration was such that when it exploded directly in front of the vessel, the very attempts to slow to avoid the apparent force of the explosion that they did indeed try would only make the disruption of their exclusion fields, and to a lesser extent the cores of those drives themselves, and the loss of momentum even worse. As I began to speed towards the now disabled ship, its crew began firing in the general direction of where my shot had originated, and as I was happily weaving through the heavy, but at this range scattered, attempts to stop my approach, it was only when Masnoa came over the comms that I realized my rookie mistake.
Sarge, you just put the system star at your back. They can see you! Damn it! As I watched the other side of the frigate open and saw the blooms of 5 elemental burst drives glow as the pirate's response issued forth, I cursed both my oversight and smiled in anticipation. 5 blast blades flew towards me with haste, in a ripper formation, with their long, segmented blast wings extending outwards. As I shifted my suit into its combat form and drew out Starvine, I aimed with my arm gun and waited for us to be in range of each other. I had them on range and would be able to fire first, but they would also get to fire at least once with their energy cannons before my first salvo landed. And unlike my rounds, which moved at a fraction of the speed of light, their shots would be traveling nearly at the full speed of light itself and would land first. I fired in a rapid in and out spiral pattern,
and saw the crimson flashes of their cannons just as I finished firing and brought my arm up and activated the shielding systems. As the beams hit my shield, and the forces of their destructive death battled with the forces of my defenses, I knew this was going to be just a first step to this dance. They staggered their fire, as to prevent me from getting another salvo off before my first had landed. And as my salvo did land, I saw the fighters break formation, with only the lead craft still on a direct path towards me. None of my shots had properly landed, but the maneuvering was the intent, not damage. As the lead craft continued to speed towards me, I struck out with Starvine and watched as the tip cleanly punched through the pilot's viewport, and knew more than likely it was the impact alone that would end him, even before the tip went through him and into the core of the craft. Acting as a pivot using my engines, the craft began to swing up violently before I retracted Starvine, and the now pilotless craft went flying into the closest of his wingmates, causing both vessels to explode in a cloud of elemental color and force. 2 down. As I began to fly towards the blast blade that was now alone, with its pilot spinning the craft around while still being carried away from me by the momentum of his previous course, he saw my rapid approach, and the pilot thought better of it and reached down, ejecting the control pod at me like a bullet, seeking to escape the coming destruction of his craft. I had to tumble forward and up to dodge the incoming pod, as the pilot was no longer an active combatant, and I had bigger fish to fry. This left me floating and turning just about the now empty and harmless blast blade. That is when I was alerted to the fact that the engines were overloading on the blast blade and about to self-destruct. Bringing my shield to full power between me and the craft, the explosion crumbled my sensors as it flowed like a volcano's eruption around my shield. As it subsided, I saw the other 2 craft make use of a cable of some kind to snag the escaping pilot's pod and begin to burn their way back to the frigate, as the supporting fire that was ineffectively but consistently trying to aid them stopped. It appears they thought I had died in the explosion, and between the composition of my suit shell and the interference of the explosion themselves, they couldn't detect me. I realized the opportunity I had, and I jetted off behind them, careful to stay in the concealing bloom of their engines as I used them for cover to close the distance to them, and then with them to the ship. As I cleared the bulk of the disruption caused by the blast blade's self-destruction, I sent a simple update to the Night Rock. Change of plans. Void in shadow. Wait for contact. VIS confirmed. Good luck. The gods are funny creatures. I tried to keep my tone light as I spoke to Fakis, the commander of our newest recruits. Powerful beyond our understanding, yet they rarely act without purpose or reason. So, just follow the guidance I have given you, and we will see this Oathbinder annulled and obliterated. Fakis sat across from me, shifting nervously, but did not say anything. He was looking as if he was second-guessing the choice to try to annul the contract that was currently laid out on the desk between us. It was a funny look for a Dragois, being a supremacist no less. But I understood. We were about to do one of those things you are always told never to do. We were about to intentionally invoke a blessed Oathbinder, blessed by the father and son of Criterion no less. But a moment later, Fakis reached out and placed his hand on the contract and began intoning the challenge. I smiled. The Dragois, while very young, I'd say too young, for one in a command role, would not let his nerves stop him from trying to free his men. The Oathbinder rose from the desk, arcs of energy rippling along its surface, with two spheres of power rising from it and drifting into the open space on the other side of my desk. "Don't be cowards. Come yourselves." I said it just above the sound of the summoning. The spheres froze for a moment, and I knew I had gotten my wish as the room went quiet. There, side by side, standing and staring at Fakis and I, was the father of Criterion, Karthus, and his son, Verisar, Skychild. Karthus had a thin smile on his face, while Verisar had a decidedly less amused look. As he spoke, the force of his words were like a gale on our ears. "By what cause do you seek to have us arbitrate?" I looked at Fakis and merely nodded. And then he spoke. "My representative, Mr. Hahn, can explain." And he pointed to me, which made Father grin fully as Verisar turned to look at me. "Mr. Hahn, I know you are no fool, and you are well aware of my stance on shenanigans involving Oathbinders. Make your case, but be warned. If we should find your cause wanting or invalid, you will pay the same price as this Dragois here." I only nodded and began, first explaining how I infiltrated the pirate ship after the battle with Fakis and his blast blades. I detailed how I had discovered that the pilots and squadron of the blast blades, who had nearly been wiped out by the defenders of the pirates' target, were under a contract that had been most dishonorably shifted and adjusted, from these men being defenders themselves, intended only to protect the gateway into the pirate system, to them being active parts of raiding activities. "That may be, but according to these terms set forth, this does not give them a right of breach. I would hope you have more than appeals to our good natures to back this." Verisar was looking more annoyed by the moment, so I sped up my explanation. I skipped the rest of the 4 days I was hiding on the ship, setting things up for what was about to happen. Instead, I began to tell of how, less than a day before the pirates made it back to their system, they again fell under attack from me. Again, they scrambled their blast blades to fight me off. The last of them, a total of 9, most of them barely functional, having been hastily patched together and comprising all of the squadron's remaining pilots. As I filled in the details of how the fighters offered to hold me off while the ship escaped, and managed to do so, Verisar raised his hand to stop me. "No matter how brave or outmatched they were, that is not a betrayal by the captain. And again, it seems that you are wasting my time, Hahn. Last chance. By the Omnimind, either make a proper point, or this ends now." I tapped a gem on my desk, and let the internal recording from the pirate's bridge play. It showed the very damaged bridge and skeleton crew taking the ship away from the combat, as the captain confirmed that they would be able to make it back in less than a day, but the blast blades would be at least a week out. Then, the captain said the magic words. "Good. Once we make it back, ensure the gate codes are changed. Those damn Jaguar think they can just fail to kill him the first time and not be punished. Let them face the guns of the gate. Less problems for us in the long run. We can just say they nobly sacrificed themselves, and none will be the wiser. The look on both of the gods' faces was that of disgust and revulsion. We only ask for the binder to be annulled and obliterated. Karthus, still smiling, was the first to respond. You sure? By all rights, you could have us mete out a righteous reprisal for this. Fakis looked at me questioningly, and I answered both of the questions at once. Yes, I am sure. Fakis and his men have been in the service of these pirates for years. Unwilling as it was, that stain is going to follow them. However, there are other factors at play. Thus, a simple annulment and obliteration will allow them to fade from thought and memory. A few years working for me to build their reputations and standing should do the rest. Father and son looked at each other and then responded in one voice. So be it. And the Oathbinder just vanished, as if it never existed. Before they could do the same, I spoke. Since you're already here, please share a glass with me before you go. I have an exquisite vintage and other matters to share with you. I looked at Fakis, who was showing his confusion, as this had not been discussed. You should let your men know that the Oathbinder is settled. I'll be along shortly. Sir, was his reply as he stood and left, giving a bow to our guests before exiting the room. Karthus and Verisar both sat and waited as I retrieved the bottle and poured a glass for each and set them out. As I sat down, I smiled, realizing how it must have appeared to young Fakis for me to seem so casual in the presence of the divine. I knew it would have an impression, and that was part of the point, to instill the proper appreciation for the world he and his men were now a part of. You've always been too soft, Han, Karthus began as he took a sip. Now care to explain how the other party to that binder isn't going to notice it vanishing? Verisar now had his turn to smile as I began, for he knew my style far better than his father. Well, when that ship made it back yesterday, the crew would have all been found unconscious, and the ship was barely holding itself together. After they get the crew out and awake, none of them remember anything for months. Records that will be able to be recovered from the damaged systems are going to show their disastrous attempt to raid that starbase, with them leaving their blast blades behind to make good their escape. The rest of the damaged systems must have tripped their counter-mutiny or counter-invasion protocols, and that released a very potent mix of sedatives and an amnesiac. Whoever installed that was a paranoid one indeed. It's very unlikely any of them will remember anything in the last month, if not 3. Karthus gave a low whistle. I see. So just by annulling and obliterating the Oathbinder, it'll look far more likely that the pirates ended it themselves, and it was lost in the chaos. With it not being magical anymore, it wouldn't have been important anyway. Clever. No memories to counter, and no evidence to counter them. He looked at his son. I can see why you wanted him. Verisar, for his part, smoothly changed the topic. Han, what else are you wanting? Sharing a glass, that's one thing. But I know you better than that. Spill. Now. No dancing around then. I'm claiming the system we are about to clear of pirates. That claim will need quiet, but not too quiet, backing. You want us to endorse you just claiming an entire system. You know that is no longer legal, right? Verisar spoke as he saw the massive loophole I was about to walk through. Not legal for the hunters, but there is no law so far that prevents a private party from doing so. Besides, this situation is rather rare, with only one way in or out of the system. And I believe with just a few proper endorsements and assurances that this is a one-off, which it is, I'm sure you can make it happen. This is going to be my unit's retirement, our base of operations, and our bankroll. Karthus and Verisar looked at each other and both drank deeply of their drinks, letting the flush of energy turn their eyes into beacons for a moment. And then Verisar spoke again. What's in the system? A single way in or out is one thing. His father cut in to finish him. But not enough for you to go to this extreme. They both went to take another drink. I smiled and answered, a Star Forge. I watched the glasses slip from their hands and begin to fall to the deck in slow motion. I figured that'd get their attention. Of course, the glasses never made it to the deck, as the gods quickly recovered both their wits and their drinks. Like I said, they're funny creatures. Karthus spoke first. Starforge. And you want us to back your claim to it? Yeah, and I'm more than willing to offer its product to those that ensure that I don't need to worry about the security of my claim. And if you aren't recognized as the system's owner, Verisar knew there was a stick behind this carrot. Then everyone in the realms will find out about it, and the ensuing conflict can distract from the fact that the product of this Starforge had been being sold to the ancient empire for centuries. Stick, with a nice little info bite to sweeten it. Verisar leaned back and smiled. And are you going to fight me for it, Han? Were I to stake my own claim? Before I could answer, Karthus was standing beside his son with a hand on his shoulder. Never mind answering that. We will back your claim, Han. Time to go, son. We need to play politics. Verisar stood and he nodded, setting his glass down, a smile on his face. Of course, Han, good fortune, and don't screw this up. He paused, taking a moment to consider. Ego Core, expect to hear from them. They'd be good folks for you to sell to. May even back your claim for the privilege. The sounds of my footfalls on the deck resounded along the corridors as I made my way from the soup bay towards my office. My fury was evident enough that Nav's drones were sure to clear the way without a word or look being necessary. Mazzy, who had no doubt been intending to try to calm my rage, thought better of it and just stood to the side of my office door, at attention, and merely saluted, awaiting orders. I want everything from all of our systems. Get it analyzed and cross-checked. I want it all on my desk by the end of the day. A curt nod, and Mazzy was gone, knowing better than to do otherwise. I walked into my office and sealed the room, poured myself a stiff drink, then stalked around to sit in my chair, and finally looked at the subject of my anger, the man that had just ended the lives of hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of people. The pirates were all gone now, and the system was clear for us to claim. Mission accomplished. In fact, it would be at least a month before anyone or anything biological could be able to enter to begin reclamation and recovery efforts, so contaminated with lethal energies the system now was. I stared at Nada, who, to his credit, did not look away or otherwise try to avoid the rage that was no doubt roiling in my glare. Nada, I began, doing what I could to maintain my composure, taking a large pull from my drink before continuing. I know you are aware of my unit's history when it comes to civilians, and the fact that in our thousands of years of service, we have never had a civvy die in our operations. He nodded and opened his mouth to reply, but I continued on. According to the preliminary readings, you just melted over 1 million people, and most likely several million. And don't try to give me any of this, they aren't people, they're pirates bullshit. But did I give you permission to speak, dwarf? Nada went stiff. You are a part of this unit, this outfit, and that means you will keep your mouth closed until you are instructed to speak by your commanding officer. Am I clear? A stiff nod was the only reply as I continued. We will get to your reasoning in a moment, and it had best be something good, or I swear, by the family as my witness, I will personally fly you a light week out from anything and leave you floating without a suit. For the briefest of instants, I thought I caught a glimpse of amusement flash across Nada's face, as if he were impressed. I decided to let it pass unremarked, as he was a Longbeard after all, and age can make even the strangest of things humorous. And so I continued. We determined that the pirates were entirely stationed at the gate complex inside the system. They had no ability to access the rest of the system or leave the gatehouse, only to receive the automated shipments from the system. And they clearly barely even had that limited control of things. They lacked the ability to adjust any of the production lines or products being made, or even turn them on. Another slow pull of my drink, allowing the rush of the contained energies to focus my mind and dull my rage. By my count, there were less than 500 pirates in that complex, with the rest of the life detected in the system belonging on the planets. Lives that were unaware of the pirates' existence, and unless something turns up in the report I'm about to get, they were not even able to get in contact with them. From what I saw looking at the systems of the gatehouse, whoever was on those planets was unaware of the nature of the forges and the factories dotting their skies. They were primitives, savage races at best, no indication of any tech on world, and you just chose to initiate a full solar system-wide purge, without any preamble, warning, or even the faintest attempt to gain authorization. Not only killing the pirates, but every other soul in that system.
took a moment to calm myself, and then finished. Now I want an answer. Now you can tell me why I shouldn't be prepping my suit for your final adventure. Nada stood and nodded before he began, saluting. Sir, I accept my actions were in direct violation of the chain of command, of the presumed protocols of the conduct of conflict, and of most of the crew's better reasoning. However, the situation required swift and immediate action if the realm's safety was to... He stopped as soon as I had lifted my hand from my glass. Quite the claim, Nada. Go on, but don't forget you are speaking to a veteran of many, many more years than yourself. Again, that near imperceivable flash on his face. And I have little patience for semantics or word games, so speak plainly and directly. I lowered my hand, and he continued. Sir, the total amount of soul-bearing individuals killed in that action was limited to only the pirates and their logistical staff in the gatehouse. Your estimates of millions of dead counts, as you've said, the beings on the planets. However, as I am sure the reports will bear out, none of them were in possession of anything approaching a soul. In addition, a visit to the brig will see that I was sure to cover my ass. One of the beings is being held there under maximum security protocols. I shook my head. Alright. So you grabbed one of them to prove they are not soul-bearing, and furthermore are a threat to the realms. I reached over and tapped a console, and the image of the being in its cell, calmly pacing, examining its enclosure and taking in each detail, sprang into being. Convince me, Nada, that this is what you say it is. A few more taps and an overlay of various scans and data appeared, all indicating that this was what it looked like. An orckin of some description. And not a primitive orc, who most certainly has a soul. Nada seemed to consider things for a moment. Yes, sir. I will head down there and prove it to you. One request? I nodded, a little confused at the sudden shift of tone. Please make it so only you and perhaps Nav are watching. It might get a little messy and personal. Of course. I was still confused. Nada was surely able to handle an orckin. He simply waited for me to unseal the door so he could go to the brig. With the stiffness to his posture I had not seen so far in the dwarf. But, without hesitation, as soon as the door was open, he made his way out without a word or sign of displeasure. An hour later, Nada was in medbay recovering, and I was now furious at myself. Not only was Nada right, he had nearly died to prove it. And it had all happened faster than I had thought possible. As soon as he had entered the brig, the Orkin just turned towards him and began trying to get at him, shifting and changing forms to overwhelm and break out from its cell with frightening ease. In the few minutes it had taken me to intervene, Nada had managed to kill it, but had taken a massive beating of his own, and he couldn't stand, bleeding badly and having several broken bones. As I lifted him to carry him to the med bay, he spoke one word, Harvester, before he passed out, mumbling in a nearly forgotten and very old tongue. That stubborn rock banger, if he had only said that in the first place. Looks like I was going to owe the bearded bastard a barrel of his favorite drink, for he had possibly saved billions with his actions. Millions of harvesters by the family. That could have spelled the death of everything.
Nearly a day later, Nada woke up. I was sitting in his room waiting, as I had been since I brought him here for the automedic systems to treat. He opened his eyes, took in the room and looked at me seriously, beginning to sit up. But before he could even ask, I spoke. No one, Nada. Even Nav is in the dark on this one. Far as I know, he's never worked with a touch, so he didn't recognize what you are from what you did. He nodded, with relief evident even behind the soreness as he laid back into his bed, letting me continue. The reports came back while you were out, and, just like you said, all soulless biomechanical constructs. However, as far as any of the crew can figure out from the scans and the available evidence, best guess is this was an old feather and scale weapons project that you were ordered to delete by our sponsor in order to deny them to the ancient empire. Nada nearly began to argue before he realized the implications of what I was saying. Just for safety's sake, I went ahead and cleared the entire system of all designs not originally included in its database when it was built. So whatever those things were, they will never come out of this place again. He still had a hard look on his face, seemingly unconvinced by my assurances. Calm down. It was clear that someone had added those things to the workload after its creation. If I had to guess, it would have been done as part of the great work. Lots of stories about things like that at the time. Systems receiving updates for no reasons, and from all across the NLR and Dragon connected spaces. Nada, seemingly now content with the explanation, closed his eyes before softly speaking a comment and question as I was walking out to let him rest. I've yet to see you puzzled, or even slowed down by a single NLR security system we've encountered, including those actively interfered with by the Antane. How are you so familiar with ancient NLR tech? And why are you able to bypass and reset systems older than many of the gods with ease? I answered with my own question as I walked out the door. Why do you sleep talking Dragwa? And old Dragwa at that, Longbeard? As the metal door slid to a close behind me, and all signal to the Night Rock was cut, it was obvious I was in a trap. Not that that was much of a surprise. This target had taken us over a month to track down to this derelict ship, and each step had been either a trap or a false lead. A trap meant I was in the right place. The room I was in was massive, some 60-foot high ceilings, with 100 yards to the opposite side, where my target stood in the open doorway, still wearing the same uniform as in the pics Cassian had given me. Scattered about the room, behind a dozen metal emplacements, were a trio of troops each. One member manning a rotary C-bots, and the others using appeared to be standard A-bots, each seemingly tricked out with all the bells and whistles. Nice of you to make it, Han. My target's voice carried the distance without needing to be shouted. As you can see, this is a trap. Yet another test of your abilities, one could say. He gestured across the room. Should be a fair test. And if you make it past the door before it closes, I'll even tell you about the revivers. More precisely, the revealers. I could feel my pulse speed up at the mention. And if I don't? He began to turn to walk away as he answered. You'll die in the self-destruct, of course. Pausing in his step, he continued. I should mention something regarding the Revealers. You actually know their founder. Personally, from what I understand. And with that, a klaxon and announcement sounded over the broken speaker system, making the fact that the nearest power plants were going critical in 30 seconds very clear. My target continued to walk away, allowing the auto sensors to delay the closing of the door, meaning I had about 6 seconds to cross 300 feet, as well as deal with the 30-odd armed killers that were about to start trying to cut me down in hails of metal stakes. Drawing both of my rotators clear of their holsters, arming and configuring them with but a thought for the first time in literally thousands of years, all before I had even moved an entire step forward, allowing myself to simply move after my target. I could hear the weapons of all the assembled killers begin to cycle and fire, and began moving and reacting automatically in flurries of motion and skill few still living had ever witnessed. Time to take out the trash and get some answers. On the table before me was a data crystal, and on this side of the door was a huge central corridor, allowing me an easy escape route from the derelict. It was clear the target wasn't here, and may have never been. Again, with the smoke and the mirrors. As the door finished closing behind me, cutting the smell of burning flesh and warped metal off as the doors closed, a voice called out. Not bad, Han. Take your prize and go. You don't have long. Better luck next time. His voice trailed off as the explosions began to tear across the derelict. I grabbed the crystal, summoned my suit, and made good my escape. Once more, a trap and a breadcrumb. The data crystal would be encoded and would take some time to unlock. And given the hassle that everything that is involved this target seems to entail, I imagine the data is nothing but a mess of half-truths and out-of-context info points. More time required to sift through and discover the importance of the data, and then move on to the next step. It was also clear that this target was aware of my hatred of the revivers, and is clearly attempting to use that to exercise control. Well, this would normally serve to anger me further, as I flew my suit back to the Night Rock, relaying orders to the captain to set course back to base as soon as I was on board. I wasn't angry. Not even upset at yet again being denied my prey. Nah, I've been around far too long to be getting upset over such minor things. As I entered the suit bay, and the pod began to take hold and secure the suit, I felt the ship jump to full speed, less than a second from being secured to on our way. I smiled. My unit was the best. Sometimes I took it for granted. As I headed to my office to write my after-action report, I glanced at the crystal that was the fruit of this action, curious as to what it would reveal. Beginning with Sarge and his team, they are currently working on fortifying their new home from the expected attempts to take this most useful of ancient creations, a fully automated and programmable system-sized factory with a star forge at its heart to fuel its operations. While the large 13-mile radius gate ring that serves as the only entry to pass the clouds of destructive energies that envelop the system was already fairly heavily armed and designed to be a defensive nightmare for any attackers. Many of these systems are in dire needs of hands-on work and maintenance before being able to be brought to full readiness. Beyond these matters of housekeeping and logistics, Sarge is slowly unveiling the data crystal obtained in his closest encounter with the mysterious antagonist yet, and will most likely resume his hunt as soon as he has the scent again. Spirits are high overall, but everybody knows that no matter how well they repair this gatehouse, without more staff, they will not be able to properly defend and hold against a properly numerically large or potent force. Furthermore, Tag's new boss has made his intent to reinforce Sarge and his unit clear, and no doubt has begun to recruit men, women, and materiel to have ready for when Sarge and his unit inevitably go looking for those very things.
If you'd like to contribute to the further exploration and explanation of the realms, please consider leaving a comment, a like, and sharing the video around. I read all the comments and make efforts to reply to each. Thank you for helping to grow the channel, and know I look forward to each and every one of your comments. Other methods of support can be found in the channel's description. Thank you for watching.